Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. This is John with Tommy's Top Picks here to bring you your Market 2.0 update thing that we're doing. This is the series where I ramble while I open a box of Uprising. First and foremost, let's go ahead and talk about 2.0 and how it's developing. Not a whole lot has changed since last week, honestly. The playables are still going up in price, generally speaking. So that's your Flame Scale Furnace, Crown of Providence, Shuko Claws, Erase Face, those key cards. The collectibles are generally holding price, with the less playable ones just dropping down slowly. So I think in the cold foil version, like maybe Cornet Peak and Ghostly Touch, those will continue to decline over time. That is my theory. And I'm going to hold out for about a month, maybe a little bit longer, before I go and try to pull in my whole collection. The Marvels, which are, I guess, kind of a special exception, because they have huge eye appeal, obviously, just on the listings, and definitely collector pieces. Very nice. I think when you think about the Marvel Dragons, not the top three, but those other ones, you'll need three of a kind, to have a fully blinged out deck. So that's probably helping maintain their price a little bit. For the legendary ones, I think it's just because they're epic and powerful, but they are still holding up between 150 and 200, which is crazy, and the listings are disappearing. Was it Dominia, whatever? That dragon is now only available for 200. There's only 4 listings. The last sold kind of market price is 113. So you're starting to see this like supply issue pop up. This should encourage more people to open boxes, which would then, because they're definitely available. It's not like the boxes are hard to come by or even that expensive. They're very much available for map or less. So hopefully we see more supply hit the market and some of these prices come down. That might, fingers crossed. I want this to happen. But there's no guarantees of any of that. So we'll have to keep an eye on it. I may miss out on this round, which would be super sad. So I'm not sure how I'll figure that out. Maybe I'll buy a playset of Uprising with all these fancy cards later at some sort of a premium. If I do miss out, I will be sad. But it does look like it's generally trending kind of sideways, and I'm sure as dragons become less popular, it will go down a little bit. But I'm starting to feel like the supply of the fancy schmancy collectible stuff is low enough that it's not really a solid chance of getting a high downward pressure. So I'm gonna do my best to avoid FOMO, and this is the experiment. This is what I signed up for. This is what I'm gonna do, and we'll see how it plays out with 2.0. I may end up having to adjust my strategy for the next set, assuming 2.0 is maintained, which I think it will. It seems to be firing on all the expected cylinders. Playable cards are becoming cheaper, aside from a few exceptions, which are also legendaries, and we should expect some, high value playable cards going forward. But generally speaking, affordable, and the collector stuff is harder to come by. So I think it's a win. I see it as a win as a collector and as someone who enjoys the game, enjoys playing the game. And is also not super competitive and super good where I walk away with prize money. So for me, I don't want my decks that are playable to be super expensive, because I'd rather spend that money on the collectible side of it. You know what I mean? So that's my thoughts on 2.0. I actually do like the way it's going so far. I wish my dragons would drop down more so I could buy them. But that's just me being greedy. Which is fine. One thing of note, aside from the cold foil situation, the Marvel situation, is the Blood of Drakai has rock solidly stayed at 314 for the cold foil. The playable one has dropped pretty much like a rock and continued to decline. It's 109, so it's more expensive for gear than it is for the Fable in the rainbow foil. So think about that. That's an interesting fact, which I don't think would have been anticipated in the design of the product. So something to note. Don't get crazy about buying the Guardian cold foil stone from the last set. I know a lot of people are doing that. There's some warnings coming out from Louis. That's a good warning. I agree. There's plenty of boxes of Everfest available. That is not of the same rarity as the Blood of Drakai cold foil. So they will not and should not be at price parity because it's a very different supply constraint. Remember, they reduced the availability of cold foil fables in this set, and it seems fairly significantly so. So they should not be the same price. So do not think that because the Guardian one is from Everfest is, a set older, it should be the same or higher price. That's not how it's going to work. That's just against the supply curve. That doesn't actually make sense. So don't get hyped into that. Even if Unlimited never comes out, I don't think it needs to be that high because clearly First Edition has plenty of boxes. That was the pre-cut period, so I think the supply cut has happened, and these are going to be rarer, and Everfest will just go down as a good supplemental set that had a lot of fun cards, but also had much supply, like a ton of supply, so they're not going to be super rare. Let's move on. The lesson here, I think, and this is where it all kind of blends together, is we get caught up in these hype cycles, these timed periods, every quarter, every 4 months, whatever. And we forget to take a look back at the long term. In the long term, assuming the game is still healthy and functional, all this stuff will rise with time. Time is the key element that's on your side. And the further back you look, the more it seems that the things have gotten blurry and the price variances is minimal, and the $5 extra you had to pay because you missed the bottom doesn't matter anymore. And this is true in all markets that have accretive value. Essentially, anytime something is on a long enough time horizon, you see the variances and volatility kind of fade into the distance as time kind of erases those momentary blips of emotion. So, speaking of time, there's some interesting things out in the world that have happened recently, and I don't think I'm going to be able to tie this into the James White Telescope so well, but I did see some interesting article on a two-dimensional time crystal. And in regards to time crystals, what is that, most people would say, because it is a relatively new concept. So essentially what it is there's this thing called a Bose-Einstein condensate. It's a quantum system. It basically sets a quantum state of matter so that it is viable in multiple ways. And I'm not a quantum physicist, but essentially what it boils down to is quantum physics is a very fuzzy, uncertain place. So if you observe it, the wave collapses, the probability wave collapses down into what it actually would be. So every time you observe it, it kind of destroys this quantum state. A Bose-Einstein quantum state is a more stable way of holding that, which is something that was created a long time ago. But in condensed matter physics, which I guess is how they qualify this whole area of physics, you're talking about the idea of making qubits, which is quantum bits, which allow for faster calculation of stuff that traditional binary computing doesn't do very well. But to do that, you need to have a state of the qubit, which is, I think they use Bose-Einstein condensates for the qubits, but either way, it's a quantum system that needs to be stabilized. Now, the problem with quantum systems is because so little interaction can collapse that quantum nature into discrete nature. What it ends up doing is if there's like a heat in the system or a slight electrical charge or whatever, like minor things that there's a lot of in just the world environment, can collapse it, and therefore it creates errors in the quantum computing component of it, which this is all brand new technology. They're getting there, and this is just the thing that came up that I thought was really neat. So in this new experiment, what they did was they took a quantum system. Well, let me back up. A little while ago, they came up with this idea of a time crystal. Now, a crystal is a repeating pattern of matter. So what that means is it's a very stable state of matter. It doesn't gain or lose energy fast. It's non-reactive, which if you think about it, think about any crystal. You can't like run electricity through them very well, and things like that. What that means is their atoms are spaced and structured in a very repetitive way, which is how you get the cool geometrics when it gets condensed and you're looking at a physical crystal. So the repeating pattern is the key to what makes a crystal. So a time crystal is a repeating pattern in time. So instead of being in space, right? So like left to right, it does a repeating pattern. It's in time, so past to future. And the way it works with a time crystal, and this is why I think it's fascinating, is essentially in this quantum space, it is the lowest energy state of the quantum system. So think of something that pulses, think like a heartbeat, right? Or if you've ever seen one of those oscillograms, you know what I'm talking about? Maybe not. Basically, think of a pulsing shape where it extends one way and then extends the other way. So think like ripples, right? Except imagine that the ripples maintained permanently, a steady state of back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. So that's a time crystal, essentially. In this quantum system, it's a low energy state which doesn't lose any energy. So while it's doing this state of motion through time, it's not losing energy, and it isn't able to be interfered with by outside thing, or rather, if it's interfered with, it loses the energy and then it will collapse. But the point is that it will stay in its ground state, the lowest energy state, with motion throughout time. So it's solid, it's stable. They found that this is particularly useful in qubits because of the aforementioned interference that can happen. So what this means is, and I'm about to wrap up, so you can just like close your eyes and stop watching the video if you want and just listen for a little bit. So what this means is it creates a more stable quantum system that is easier to calculate with. Now, historically, I think the loss value on any particular qubit was like, I don't know, 50%. I'm kind of making up the numbers. But essentially, every time you try to calculate, there's a 50% chance that the bit would error out and not give you a valuable or useful calculation. That's not great. So they're trying to figure out ways to stabilize this. And so what just recently showed up was the ability to essentially use two different time dimensions by using a Fibonacci sequence. Now, this is mind-boggling. I love this. By applying a slight bit of energy and creating that pulse that we were talking about, that steady state pulse that operates on a Fibonacci sequence, which is 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13. It's basically you add the last number of the set. So it creates kind of a spiral if you were to map it out geometrically. So essentially it is repeating but also expanding, and which I don't fully understand. I'm actually fascinated by this concept and want to think about it more and actually dive into it a little bit more. But what it does is it creates two time dimensions, the repetitive cycle of the pulses and the increasing cycle of the Fibonacci sequence, something like that. And by doing a dual time crystal, a dual timeline crystal, if you will. I don't know exactly how you describe it because I'm not sure they actually know yet either because they're still exploring it. But a crystal that has two different repetitive time sequences through, that's the accurate way of saying it. It stabilizes the qubit even further so that the error state was, I believe, something like 25%. So it cuts out a massive amount of the error. And what that does is it allows for a more stable calculation platform. And ultimately, you're going to have, like if you think about bits in computers, there's, bazillion bits in every computer every second traveling just to render your screen. So what ends up happening is you have a lot of these things operating in series or depending on the exact system, different ways. And with this quantum version of it, with just one, you can achieve quite a lot. With a couple dozen, you can achieve ridiculous amounts of computing because you can use that quantum state. How do I bring this back to normal stuff? Typically, so quantum states allow for the most efficient, this is going to be wrong, but it's close enough, most efficient pathing towards an answer. So in a binary system, you might go down a tree, like if this, then that, if this, if not that, then this, if not that, then this, if not that, then this, right? You go down this path of trees, these optionalities to see what the answer ultimately is. Again, this isn't exactly right, but it's vaguely right. So when you're trying to search for an answer in a very complex problem that has multiple variables like that, multiple branches of optionality, it takes a while because it has to calculate down each path to get to the answer that's wrong and say, nope, that's the wrong one. Let's go ahead and try the next one. In quantum computing, you don't have to do that. Quantum computing will collapse down on the correct answer essentially immediately. So things that would take a normal computer like 100,000 years to calculate can be done in seconds to minutes on a quantum computer, and very limited quantum computer, one with like 1, 2, 3 qubits, like very, very lightweight, because we have not been able to make very big ones. I think the largest one was like 24 qubits or something like that so far. I could be wrong on that. I might be dated. But point being is that having those systems work at scale is very hard. There's very minimal amounts of qubits, but even a few of them create this vast leap in calculating capability. And this new system, this multi-dimensional time crystal that I was talking about, and when I say multi-dimensional, I don't actually mean like it's in 5D and we're going through space and we're breaching reality or anything like that. No. It's just a dimension of measure, right? That's the best way to think of it. So there's two different time dimensions. One is operating at a pulse of, say, 1 per millisecond. We'll just say like 1, 2, 3, 4. The other one's operating at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, like whatever, right? The second one's Fibonacci. I screwed that up, but essentially it's operating at that other pace. And so there's two dimensions of crystallization, if you will, of this qubit. And that creates a higher stability. It's less easy to interfere with it from an outside source, like heat or electricity or whatever, which means it's a stable thing. Now, in computing, this happens all the time where you lose a bit. And all processors are equipped to manage that and deal with it. So what they do is they read the output of whatever calculation is being done. Sometimes there's like static electricity or noise in the line or whatever, and one of the bits is lost. It's like, oh, this is corrupt. This isn't correct. And they have ways of checking whether it's made it through safely or not, blah, blah, blah. And then the processor basically calls the instruction back up and says, do it again because you failed on that. This all happens seamlessly in the background, error checking essentially on data, and it just kind of goes through and we don't even notice it. Occasionally we will when it has a massive error and it collapses and then we get the error screens and stuff. In quantum, the error rate is huge. Like I was saying, the failure was like 50% before. Now they're down to like, call it 25%. I could be wrong on the exact numbers, but you get the idea. And so what that does is it vastly increases the ability to get a process to correctly perform. And when you do that and you scale it out, right, you get more and more of these things that can do these massive calculations. You can duplicate. You can run several parallel trying to seek the same answer. And then if 3 of them fail, but 2 of them make it through, then you still have an answer. You have an answer and a confirmation that that's the answer, right? So by being able to use this dual dimension of time, time crystals, they are getting closer and closer to a state of quantum computing where it will be useful, applicable, and commonly available. Now, commonly available will still be in a lab and will still be at the highest levels of R&D, but it becomes more viable to do things. And don't get me wrong, they've already done crazy calculations with quantum computers. They took some, I believe it was an NP problem. No, I'm misspeaking on that. They took some problem that would have taken a long time to calculate with a digital computer, a normal binary computer. And they were able to calculate it in a few minutes. So that has happened. They have successfully done that. So quantum computing does work. It's just very unstable and not very reliable. And they probably had to run it like 100 times to get the answer to come out correctly or something. I'm making that part up. But it was probably very difficult to get it to do it correctly. By making it better at avoiding errors, they're going to be able to do that more frequently. So what does this mean? Time is a valuable and important dimension to consider anything, including financial decisions. See, I have to bring it back to the cardboard, right? Otherwise, what's the point of rambling on a cardboard channel about this stuff? So no matter how many dimensions of time you're considering, whether it be the short-term 4-month releases or the longer-term, decades of time scale for a card game, new, old, and otherwise. Time in the market will be timing the market. Trying to get that perfect bottom is much less likely than it is to just average over time and hold your position for a long period. And assuming the success of the game, such as Flesh and Blood, it will gain in value over time. So there you go. Multiple time dimensions working in quantum computing to cardboard. Hopefully you enjoyed this content. If you did, hit the subscribe button. I have to say, I thought about this a lot and how to do something really funky. I tried to figure out James Webb. I just can't do it. I'll try. I'll continue to think about it. Maybe I'll come up with a solution to that one. This was the closest I got. I was like, time and looking back into time. I mean, if you want to think about James Webb, they did see the oldest galaxy ever measured with it already, and it was, I believe, 100,000 years. I could be wrong about this, but I believe they saw a galaxy that was formed only 100,000 years after the Big Bang. I feel like I'm wrong on that. It's something like that, though. It was very, very early galaxy. And that was pretty cool. So that got me thinking about time, and then I saw the time crystal thing. I was like, that's easier to work with. So maybe I'll tie in some more James Webb stuff. We hopefully have years and years of awesome observations from it to come. So if I get some really cool inspiration from that, I will try to tie it back into cardboard. Let's just make cardboard galactic and trans-time dimensional and computational and statistical and economical, and why not? We can take cardboard into all the dimensions of reality. Why not? So I hope you liked the content. If you did, hit the subscribe button. We're almost at the 200 mark, so we can give away the comic. Very happy to have you guys around. Really appreciate our patrons and what they do for us. So if you do like it and you feel like becoming a patron, please do. We would really appreciate it. None of the money goes to us. It all goes to the channel itself. And frankly, we haven't even been able to pull any money off of Patreon yet because we don't have enough patrons for it to generate the right. You have like a minimum for a withdrawal, and we haven't hit it yet. So we are still very small and growing and excited to do so. So we hope that you like the content. Like I said, leave a comment or subscribe or like. Let me know. Maybe you have a funky topic that you'd like me to explore. Feel free to leave a comment, and I'll try to tie it back into cardboard. No promises on that because it's definitely a challenge. All right, guys. I hope you have a good one. Crack some packs. Enjoy some games. Remember, it is a hobby and it's for fun first and foremost. None of the things I say here are financial advice, and I just do it because I enjoy it. All right, guys. I'll talk to you next time. Have a good one.